for joining us. Real talk, real faces, real conversations here from all our places. Real perspectives rise when we make the time. Different minds, same table, one seat, one light. Open train of thought, come right along. Open train of thought, we keep it on strong. Open train of thought, where voices belong. Open train of thought. Welcome to the conversation.
To the Open Train of Thought podcast. I'm Sam Blue Sr. Thank you for joining us for real conversations, real perspectives with real people. This podcast is a place for open dialogue on the issues that impact our communities, culture, education, politics, and future. We believe that understanding begins with listening, even when those opinions are different. So sit back, get comfortable, and help me in welcoming tonight's special guest, Annette Albright, Mecklenburg County Chapter Chair of Moms for Liberty. She works and advocates with parents and families on education issues, school safety, parent involvement, education transparency, and policies she believes will improve student achievement. This evening, she'll share her perspective on the challenges facing North Carolina schools, and we'll discuss recent state legislation that could shape the future of education and affect local communities across North Carolina. So please join me in welcoming Annette Albright to the Open Train of Thought podcast. How you doing?
I'm good. Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on.
Good. I really appreciate you sharing your time. And I just wanted to see if you wanted to just take a few seconds to tell the viewers about yourself.
Okay, sure. So a long-term career, I worked in the Department of Corrections as a probation parole officer, correctional officer, victim advocate, court services, several different positions, and decided that I would go to Charlotte Mecklenburg School because I felt that intervention was better than punitive and that you would get better results. So upon entering Charlotte Mecklenburg school system, I was kind of disappointed in academics and how students were being educated.
No.
I think it was June of 2016. I was assaulted in Hardin High School. And I think the unique thing about that assault is that I was not the first educator that had been assaulted that year. I was actually the seventh educator that had been assaulted, including the resource officer had been assaulted by students twice. So that was a concern that I had been raising all year, especially coming from a law enforcement background. And that never materialized into policies that kept educators and students safe. So that's how I began advocating for policies and advocating for changes that will help keep educators and students safe on school campuses.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate that. And again, I appreciate you for being here. I'd like to ask the viewers if you have anything that you would like to ask, just put it in the comments and we'll get it forward. Right now, I want to play our disclaimer. Just because we're going to be talking about some law bills, just to let the people know, that we represent ourselves.
This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Views expressed are those of the host and guest and do not represent any organizations. Discussions on politics, policies, and current events are based on opinions and available information, which may change. This podcast does not provide professional advice, so listeners should research and verify information independently. Hosts and guests are not liable for any decisions or outcomes based on the content.
Well, the first thing I wanted to ask you, I just wanted to dig right in because I think we have some things to cover that I really think the viewers are like. The first thing I wanted to ask you, in reference to public schools and private schools, North
Mhm.
Carolina has seen more families choose private and charter schools in recent years. In your opinion, what are the biggest reasons parents are making that decision?
And that is a great question. So this has changed and flipped over recent years. It used to be academics was noted as the reason that families were pulling out of public school. But recently, the number one reason that families are choosing to go with private schools or homeschool their students is public school violence. So public school violence is now at this point the biggest factor that is driving families out of public schools.
So when you say that, many teachers are speaking to some teachers, many of them are saying student behavior and violence have become more common in public schools. What I want to ask you is how much of a
Mhm.
role do safety concerns play in a parent deciding to move their child to private or public schools? And what would you say is the
Mhm.
reasoning outside of uh, what have kept parents from doing that in the past, like financial or just making a change?
So I will say that several things have factored into these decisions. I think the first reason, and when we're talking about the school violence, is that now everyone has a cell phone. And so
Mm.
students are actually recording what's going on in these public schools, and they're uploading them to social media, or they're calling their parents and sending them videos and saying, "Hey, I'm afraid this happened, that happened." So parents' eyes have been opened to the climates inside of these public schools. If you go back to my assault in 2016, that's exactly what happened and how it went public and national so fast. The students recorded the altercation and they uploaded it to Facebook. And before CMS could get it taken down, it had 1 million views. So that is one of the biggest factors that is driving more parent awareness is students having cell phones and they are recording these interactions. I think another thing that is also driving the violence is also the students having the cell phones. Because I've talked to educators, and what they're saying is happening is that with social media and cell phones, these students are beefing on social media. It's going to be at this time at a certain place, and all the students are gathering with their phones up, ready to record. So
Mm.
that's another thing that is driving a higher rate in school violence. And also, you have to look at policies. Okay. How are policies affecting school violence? Are they shaping a climate where that is safe and that students will be held accountable? Or is something else happening where students aren't held accountable, where the goal is to keep all students, regardless of how dangerous they are, inside of classrooms? So policy is probably the third. At one time, policy was the first because policies were taken away and lessened to give
Mm.
certain students more than one opportunity, and that's the point when we started seeing a violent uptick, and
Yeah.
especially against educators. So it's a lot of different things. It just continues to revolve.
Okay. So when we speak about the public, private, and charter schools, some people have only been involved
Mhm.
with the public schools. Some people have. I know people
Mhm.
their child have gone through K through 12 in private school. Some started in private school and
Mhm.
switched to public, and vice versa. So, what I wanted to ask
Mhm.
you is public, private, and charter schools operate differently. what structural differences, such as discipline policies, classroom expectations, parent involvement, or school leadership make to make one type more appealing than the other?
So I think the first difference that we must understand that charter schools are public schools. Okay, they are funded by taxpayers' dollars. They are just not a part of that district. But CMS, they are required to do what's called, I think it's push through funding or gate through funding. I can't remember the exact term, which means if a child goes to a charter school, then that money is going to follow that child to that charter school. But here's the thing that a lot of CMS administrators complain about. If that child returns back to public school, say that the parents say, well, we tried it, but it's not a good fit, and that child returns back to the public school, that money stays behind at the charter school. So that's what a lot of CMS administrators are complaining about and drawing attention to. Now, as far as private schools, they're not obligated to follow state mandates. They're not under the school district. They can be religious, they can be non-religious, whatever they want to do. And they're not mandated by the state. So that's the difference.
So how do school policies, teachers, parents, administrators each share responsibility for creating that safe and successful learning environment? What changes would you like to see in each one of those groups?
I think the first change that we should all want to see is that we need safe school environments. And I continue to say this, that educators cannot teach in chaotic and dysfunctional environments, and students cannot learn in dysfunctional and chaotic environments. And so at one point, policy leaned toward keeping a child in the classroom. That was the whole thing. We've got to keep the child in the classroom. We don't want them suspended. We don't want them out in the streets. We have to keep them in the classroom. So what you're doing is you're sacrificing 32 students for one. And, children are going to be children. When they realize that they're not going to be held accountable, then the behaviors are going to increase. So we have to have policy that a policy that addresses behaviors, and we have to address the behaviors that are keeping the school environment from being a place of learning or is making the school environment dangerous. So that's the first thing. And then we have to have principals who are going to enforce these policies. And that was another huge thing. When I was at Hardin High School, there were a lot of policies on the book, but they were not being enforced. And with educators, my thing is I am 100% behind our educators. They should be in classrooms to teach. They should not have to handle behaviors that are outside the norm. That should be done by other staff, and get the children or child who is causing the disruptions. They need to be removed from the classroom as soon as possible to keep that environment good for academic learning.
Well, with saying that, and we talked about a lot of parents taking their kids out of public school. There's also been an issue with teacher retention. North Carolina schools continue to face teacher shortages. How are student behavior, school policies, and working conditions affecting teacher recruitment and retentions? And what can be done to keep more great teachers in the classroom?
And that is actually a good question. So what we're seeing now is we are seeing what we call highly qualified and career educators are retiring early. So they are leaving the field, they are leaving the classroom. And the educators that I have spoken with said they are concerned for their safety. I had the husband of one educator to reach out to me and say, my wife has been doing this for 30 years. She loves it. I am concerned for her role. So what's happening is that you're getting educators in the classroom that might not be qualified. They're not certified educators. And at one point, CMS had a program that they were so low on recruitment and retention, they had what's called a guest teacher program, where if you had a high school diploma, you could come in and you could be a guest teacher. So you think about 8 or 9 years, and they're not certified to even be teaching what they're teaching. And I spoke with one student that spoke out, that reached out to me, and she was a senior, and she had taken Spanish and did not have a teacher that could teach or speak Spanish the entire school year. So now you're hindering academic performance because you're just getting a warm body class to keep the kids in the classroom all day, and they don't have the credentials to teach in those subject matter areas. So it is a ripple effect.
I definitely agree with you. I just believe that I think teacher pay also, but just going to, I didn't know it was called being a guest to get, I just knew that some people, if you had a high school diploma, you can get an emergency certification and it would cover you. And there's some people that I actually know personally that they can't stand kids or anything, but they needed a job to pay the bills. And so they joined the school system and they took that test and they hated it. But all they didn't have the passion to work with kids. To me, teachers are so amazing because they have that passion that a lot of people don't. It takes a special person to want to work with someone else's kids. And I think that definitely messed it up because you had some of these teachers that were not qualified because all they had was that emergency certification and they were getting into it with these kids. And they're not as disciplined as some of these kids. Some of them are straight out of high school and didn't go to school. And all of a sudden, they're now a teacher responsible for mentoring an entire classroom. And I just think that was kind of like the small snowball, and it just started to roll and get worse because I definitely feel that teachers are definitely underpaid. We have people in the past that have said that it's their priority, but it's a priority. How come you can't pay them more? Like, I personally don't believe that a teacher that's been teaching over 10 years should make under $90K a year or, about $90K a year because you're literally like just, you have some kids that they will go to school and they'll accidentally call their teacher that's a female, it'll slip out and they'll say mom. Or, if it's a male, they'll say dad because they're with them almost all throughout the day. You're talking about 8 or 9 hours a day, and then you're only at home with your actual parents for 3 or 4 hours before you go to sleep. So I just think that is a policy that they definitely need to remove because I think if they remove that policy, you pay the teachers more and then they'll stay. They're being treated so bad because so many teachers that I personally know, they spend their own money buying clothes. There may be a child in their class that they don't have book bags, they don't have certain things, and they'll go school shopping. So when that child gets to school, they'll have them go to the bathroom and change clothes so they don't get teased and stuff. So it's a lot of people, a lot of teachers that are really passionate. So I just think the reward should be in accordance. There just has to be a checks and balances. So nothing happens like what happened in Wayne County schools in Detroit, where they gave the incentive for teachers. If your kids test higher, you'll get a bonus. But what happened was the teachers started just helping the kids memorize the answer key. And it was this big
Of course.
scandal in
Yes.
Detroit public schools because the teachers didn't care about the kids. They was just caring about that bonus. So once they did do an audit, they found out that I think it was like 93% of the kids couldn't pass their EOGs. So what do you think about that?
Anytime that you're paying for performance, you're going people will way to shortcut, and money always be the incentive. Now, I absolutely agree that we have to pay our educators more, right? But again, it used to be that educators like, well, if I just made more money, but now educators is like, it's not worth my personal safety to go into these classrooms for this little bit of money, right? So again, that goes back to creating, a workplace where teachers feel safe, where they're comfortable, whether they don't have to worry about, whether or not they're going to have to get into physical altercations with children, right? So that has now become the biggest factor. A lot of people are like, you could give me a $50,000 raise. I'm not going back into that hostile work environment. And you have to think about how mentally draining that is on an educator. Most of our educators put in 50 to 60 hours per week, and they only get paid a set salary. So you think about 50 to 60 hours a week, and then you think about a hostile environment where you don't know if you're going to be attacked by a student, if you're going to have to fight, you're called names all day. And then you look at your pay and you're like, what am I doing all of this for? What is the point? And so the first thing that we have to work on is creating work environments where teachers feel safe. Then you will get the professionals and the highly qualified and the long-term educators back into the classroom. But I don't want to work in a fight or flight mode every day. And I don't think anyone should have to, especially state employees.
And the one thing I'll say, I know they just approved the budget recently, and it was kind of like, okay, they said we're going to give you this 5% raise or 7% raise, but then medical premiums for state and teachers employee went up 17%. So a lot of people, their out of pocket went from being $2,200 to $4,500. So I just think like there's so many things that I told somebody the other day that teachers need to just, if they want like a salary that's equivalent to the work that they're doing, they're going to just have to go hard in the paint like the bus boycott that lasted 18 months. When they go out to strike and it's on a teacher work day, that doesn't affect the kids weren't going to be at school anyways. The school, but then you have some municipalities that will say, okay, we know we're striking on this Monday, so let's just make it a optional teacher work day. And I just think that is so soft. Like teachers need to just strike for a week or two. What is the money that the teachers paying to the teachers union? Just like when you go to Ford,
Legally,
go ahead.
In North Carolina, we can't call it a union, but that's what it is.
Oh, I was just speaking about like teachers becoming more just striking. Like, don't predict and say, okay, just don't come to work for a week. Let the states and the leadership see the impact, the true impact. It's almost kind of like, I don't want to take it to this, but let's say you have a slave owner that has cotton fields. And it's almost like that slave owner can say, okay, well, Miss Mammy died.
Right.
So Sunday when we had a funeral, you don't have to work that day, but you're gonna be at work the next day. To me, that's literally what teachers are
Mm-hmm.
doing. Like, there's really no impact. There's
Right.
very few school districts that didn't have make it an optional teacher workday. So there was literally no impact on that community, on for the teachers to like say, okay, now we standing up.
Mhm.
Now I see them bragging about, oh man, we got this 7%, but then they look at the small print of the new medical, the healthcare program, and it's gone up like double. So I just think that,
Mhm.
if teachers really want it bad enough, they need to go a little bit harder. Because right now, the
Mhm.
the protesting and stuff that they're doing is not really it's not even like ringing the doorbell. It's almost like I know you
Right.
said that there's no unions, but they have, I guess the organization that kind of like does that, they're receiving like millions of
Right.
money a year, I believe. So I know
Mhm.
if someone works
They
for a
are.
car
Mhm.
company and they go on strike, they get like a little check, like a supplement. That's what they're paying those dues for. So I just think it needs to be
Mhm.
something like
Yeah.
teachers
And
need to require more.
mhm.
Go ahead.
And while we're also, I want to make the point that we could lessen the load a lot on our educators if parents became involved in their students'
Mhm.
education, and that is a huge thing. Is parental engagement. And I've
Mhm.
talked to some educators that will tell me, oh, we haven't talked to that child's parent all year. We haven't seen that child's parent. We send emails, we call. They tell us don't call the house anymore, don't call back. That's your problem. So, as parents, we have to do better to lessen that load off of that educator because at this right now, and that's why charter schools tend to do much better than public schools because there are parental engagement requirements to have your child in a charter school. So that's why charter schools are outperforming a lot of the public schools is because the parent has to donate so many hours, in service. If we're
Mhm.
reaching out to you 4 times and you're not calling us back, then your child can't come back to school till we hear from your parent. And school absence, those are another reason our children are performing lowly. So we have to also increase parental engagement by 2,000%. And I have spoken with county commissioners, I have spoken with city council members, and they're all saying, if you can figure out a way, do it because we've been trying.
Mhm.
And so that's another thing that I think that we should look at from a state mandate position, that we are going to have to put requirements in place for parents if you're going to have your child in a public school and they're receiving a free education.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And I do think that I know when our son was in high school, we we were very involved. And I remember the first time I went
Mhm.
to a PTA meeting. I was the only male there and I was the only black person there.
Mhm.
It was all these white wives and stuff, and they were like talking about things that need what can they do, and I'm sitting here like, well, what is different? What is different from the white families and the black families? And I'm like, well, because a lot of the
Mhm.
black families, they're not able to make those PTA meetings that start at 3:30 because but it's only like I think once a month. So like you can do some PTO or something if your child is worth it, for an hour and a half or 2 hours. But I just think that I was speaking to someone and they were like, yeah, I don't have time to go to the PTA meetings. I got to work, but his son played basketball. So when I asked him, I said, well, in middle school, our son's basketball game started at 3:30. I said, you was at every game. So I think it's more about a priority. Like we show out as a community
Yeah,
for sports. When our kids is playing, we're gonna leave work early. We're gonna do what we can. And I just wish we had that same excitement to better the education as we do, and to make sure that jump shot or that soccer or that baseball or that volleyball is doing what it's supposed to be doing. What do you think about that?
absolutely. When I was a parent at West Mecklenburg High School here in Charlotte, about 1,500 students, and they had their PTA meeting, and it was 6:30 at night. So not a lot of excuses if you're working during the day. Not a lot of excuses, why you're not showing up. Out of all, there were 3 parents that showed up, myself and 2 other parents. And the principal said, well, I guess this is it. And I was like, no, we're not going to carry the whole school. But Friday night, there was a football game. Every parking space in the lot was gone. So if you can get off work and be at a high school football game by 7, why couldn't you make the PTA meeting that started at 6:30? So we have to stop, using all these excuses. If you're from a 2-parent home, you can come. 1 parent can come. We have technology now. You can join by Zoom or Teams. That with the technology, there's not a whole lot of reasons why people are saying, I just don't have time to participate. And if you're saying that you don't have time to participate in your own child's education and invest in your own child, why should anyone else put 110% into your child when you don't? And that's going to be a child that falls through the cracks.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think that we have to be accountable. Like if we want teachers to really mentor and hone our kids into how we want them to be, we need to make sure that we do our part at home. And it's kind of like when we, if you're learning about place settings or something, like most of private schools here in Raleigh, they do that. They teach etiquette, along with economics and writing in cursive still. But they teach this, but then when you get home, nobody sits at the table. Everybody sits on the carpet, eat their food, have their plate right there on the floor, and they're eating, just watching TV. Like there's no I told someone the other day that there are no more Black communities. There are only Black neighborhoods, and he was like, well, what's the difference? And I said, well, the community is the village. Like I could discipline the young man 3 houses down, or, I can check him if he messes up, or if he's out here, if I see him disrespecting. And I said, but a neighborhood is just geography within a circumference of an area, all the housing. And I said, now, if you try to be a community and you try to scold a young man for his pants being down low, you're going to get a knock on the door and you're going to get fussed out by a mother saying, well, if you got a problem with my boy, you come talk to me. You don't talk to him. I said, that's why I believe there's no more communities, because we don't. The only time I hear now that it's about the village is when we're preparing for a funeral. At the repast, or when people are talking, they talk, oh, it's time to do a village. We need to be a village. That's the only time. So I just think we have to start. It's only our responsibility to bring back Black communities, because you have Little Italy, you have Chinatown, like you have all, and the things that I spoke about, they literally can correct other kids in the neighborhood. Like that's how the Black community was. So I just think we need to try to go back to those roots, and I think things will definitely improve with that. What do you think?
So, what I also know about the English concept, I did some research on that. And of course, that came from Africa. But I was looking for what happened to that concept. And what I discovered, and it makes more sense, it said that there are now more dysfunctional families in the community than there are whole functioning families. So at one point, you had a community mostly functioning families that would reach out and help the one or two dysfunctional families. But now the dysfunctional families are more prevalent than the intact families. And that's basically what destroyed that concept.
We're pretty thorough with our first topic. And our second topic is about just some news that happened here in North Carolina a couple of weeks ago, where four bills or four laws that the governor vetoed were overridden. And I just wanted to ask you, your thoughts on how they were overridden, what took place for it to be a veto-approved vote, and specifically one was cooperation with ICE. It was, I think, 150 Senate Bill 153, and the other one was Senate Bill 558. And 153 was dealing with just cooperations with ICE. So basically, it's a North Carolina Border Protection Act. I know a lot of people don't agree with ICE, but what I'll ask you, is there any way that would now sheriffs and local law enforcement having to work with ICE to get people that's already in the prisons out, just they've already broken the law. But do you think that there's any positive effect on the Black community with that?
Absolutely. And for someone who has a law enforcement background, I think it's sad that, we actually had to have a bill passed, because back when I was in law enforcement, that was just known that all law enforcement agencies work together to enforce the law, to apprehend offenders, to get violent people off the streets. So it kind of law enforcement community as a whole when some sheriff departments say, we're not going to do this. But you have to know who is in your country and for what reason. And since we have had a crackdown on open borders, we've seen that fentanyl that was trafficked in from Mexico has decreased. Those overdose have decreased. So, we have laws and things we have to enforce to keep people safe. That's one. And a lot of people lost their children to fentanyl overdose because this fentanyl was getting into the high schools. And I took part in a meeting in Gaston County where I did not believe the number of fentanyl busts that they had made in Gaston County. I don't think people had any idea. Secondly, you have to look at when illegals are coming into the country, they're not going to, like the high earning neighborhoods. They're going to the neighborhoods and they're going to concentrated poverty where they can just kind of slide in. And as soon as they get in, they start applying for government services. And the issue with this is they're not paying taxes. Most of them make their money working construction or cleaning houses where they're getting paid in cash. And then they're sending their students to school. So even though they're not paying into the tax base, their families are benefiting from taxpayer dollars. So student.
Mhm.
So you get a certain amount of money from the state and a certain amount of money from the county per student. So if they
Mhm.
have accounted for 135,000 and then you get 20,000 more across the border, then those funds have to come from somewhere. And the states, 2 million for the illegals, the school district just has to find a way to make it work. So they absolutely are pulling resources from Black communities and Black students that need those funds and resources, and where their parents are paying taxes and paying into that tax base. So
Mhm.
absolutely allowing open borders, that is very harmful to Black communities.
Okay. When I look at the issue when it comes to like those resources, um, I think that we need to take care of the people that are here first. Like we need to make sure that
Mhm.
we end veterans being homeless or members of the Black community being homeless or
Mhm.
starving, or needing food. We need to make sure we
Mhm.
take care of those before we go out, because
Mhm.
when I remember they shipped like 2 or 3 buses of illegals up to Martha's Vineyard, within 24 hours, they
Mhm.
were all gone, except for a handful, because some of
Yeah.
them people in Martha's Vineyard is like, oh man, we got a guest house. You could, like they needed some help, like maids and so they were welcome, but as a whole, they removed them from Martha's Vineyard. But when you had like cities like
Yeah.
Chicago, Detroit, um, Memphis and some other places, they literally put them in the community and they just start sucking up all the Black resources that should be for the Black community. And that's what
Mhm.
people don't understand. Like when they shut down the community center, I think
Mhm.
the Walter Community Center on the south side of Chicago, that was the only community center that had a football field. And all the Pop Warner games were hosted on that field on the south side of Chicago. But
Mhm.
they brought in,
Mhm.
I believe it was like 200 illegals, and they put them in that
Mhm.
community center and closed it because they wanted them to have a soccer field to play on. So now the Black
Right.
community for 2 years lost their entire Pop Warner program. Like, so what are all these young Black
Right.
kids gonna do to burn their energy, to relieve stress and anxiety from being in school, from doing what they need to do? And those are the things. And when it comes to when you mentioned about paying into the tax system, I'm more, I guess,
Mhm.
sometimes maybe like the libertarian type side, to where if it is true that so many people are paying into the system with taxes and things like that,
Mhm.
I'm like this.
Mhm.
You can do an audit, and if someone has paid into the system 5 to 10 years and they're undocumented and they don't have any like violent
Mhm.
crime, I'm not talking about like a speeding ticket or a parking ticket, something like that. If they don't have anything violent, I think there should be a
Mhm.
means, because they have a record of paying taxes, paying Social Security, paying FICA, paying all these things. I believe they should be able to find some form, because they have 5 to 10 years record of them paying into the system, to where okay, we can fast track you because you have paid into the system. But nobody is talking about that, because I know everybody that I know that we have do contracts like for our home, no checks,
Mhm.
no wires, everything is Venmo,
Mhm.
Zelle, Cash App, or cash. And I talked to some people. Like I was speaking to this one guy. He's a barber, and
Mm-hmm.
he has a townhouse on the south side of Raleigh, real nice area. He has a house
Mm-hmm.
in the suburb right outside of Raleigh. He has two houses back home in where he's from, and living life, has a BMW X5, a Tahoe, high country, like doing his thing. Now I know, well, he's a
Mm-hmm.
citizen. He has citizenship now, but the thing is like he sends a whole lot of money home. And that's what people don't understand. Like
Mm-hmm.
when you on paydays, you look at Western Union, the lines going out the door of people sending their money home and they didn't pay taxes or anything. But to me,
Yeah.
you shouldn't benefit from a system if you didn't contribute. That's my pet peeve about all of this stuff. You shouldn't benefit. And then when the Immigration Naturalization Act, the NIA, was revised,
Mm-hmm.
so basically anybody that crossed over the border illegally, because they was on U.S. soil, they was granted some form
Mm-hmm.
of being an asylee. And somebody was like, okay, they don't get SSDI or SSI.
Mm-hmm.
I said, yes, they do. I said, if you Google, can illegal immigrants receive SSDI? One of the first links that'll pop
Mm-hmm.
up in Google is a page on the Social Security Administration, and it has those 7 rules that was changed to allow
Mm-hmm.
anybody that came across the border to get it. So what I ask people in the Black community is that, are you fine with your parents, pop, grandma, and all them only getting like $700 to $900 a month, but then someone that has never contributed to our system getting $2,500 a month tax free, getting rent assistance, getting utilities paid, getting free cell phones from Verizon? Are you fine with that? And they
Mm-hmm.
didn't even contribute to the system. So that's my thing. I think the taxes would be the tell all to grant everybody what they need. They would fast track through the system, which people would be happy as long as they have 5 to 10 years of paying taxes. At least that would be my that would kind of like be my, you got to give the get, as far as policy. What do you think?
Um, I mean, coming into a country illegally is a crime, right?
Yeah.
Crossing into any country illegally is a crime. So I think you have to deal with that one first. That is a crime. And also, in order to pay taxes, you have to have a social security number. If you have a social security number, you're not undocumented, right? You've gone through the proper channels to say, hey, I'm here and I'm going to get a job and I'm going to contribute. There's been some type of background check done on you to make sure you don't have murder charges in another country. I remember in Chicago when we saw an influx of diseases that came in because Americans are forced to be vaccinated, but you've got people just walking across, and crossing into the country. And another issue that I take really to heart is that you have people in the United States who have worked and they have bought property and maybe they couldn't afford to pay the taxes and they lost their property or they went to jail or grandma lost the house, but then you have these people coming into the country um, utilizing those tax dollars. I think if we're going to set up a system where I can walk over from another country and utilize tax dollars, no one should be penalized who's saying, hey, I can't afford to pay these taxes.
Yeah. And that's my thing where I look at is, okay, how can we kind of like, politics is kind of like negotiating. So my thing is, yes, it is illegal to just come across the border, and it's considered civil, but when you're sent back across the border and you come again, that's like a federal felony, you know.
Yeah.
But what I'm speaking about are people that have paid into the system where they may not have a social security number, but they have an ITIN, you know, that international tax identification number. I have friends that have CDLs,
Mhm.
and some may say, oh, well, you know, I'm undocumented or this. And I'm like, no, you got a CDL. Like, you had to have all your stuff together to get that CDL. You know, you know, because it's a federal license. That's why you know, if I get a CDL in North
No,
Carolina,
I think
go ahead.
I'm trying to remember whether it was Texas or California. I can't remember which one, but they were giving out CDLs without the documentation. And I think it came to light when some illegals crashed into a family or a truck, killing
Mm.
um,
That's
the
happened.
other
Yeah,
people. And then there was this,
yeah,
yeah,
that's
it was
happened.
discovered that they did not go through the proper channels to get the CDL.
Yeah, what happened with that situation is California lacks their laws without notifying the federal government. And it was the federal government who
Okay.
was dropping the ball for not making sure states enforce it. Now we're at a point to where the federal government is enforcing it. So if a state, a separate state, whether Texas, California, Florida, Michigan, if they are not enforcing the commercial driver license law with ANVA, um, what will happen is they can lose all their federal funding for transportation. So
Right.
California, a lot of
Right.
people, when they was coming across the border, they were going to California and going to the DMV, and the DMV would say, you know, if you're illegal, they was asking them, okay, what kind of license did you have? And they was just saying, oh, I drive the tractor, the big tractor, and they would issue them a license, you know, for that. They didn't even
Yeah.
have to take the, you know, the CAT test, you know, the driver license test that you get CDL, the CAT test. They didn't even have to take
Right.
that. So the thing
Right.
is
The
like,
state trooper said that.
yeah, we have, because I've worked with commercial driver license and licensing like
Okay.
most of the schools here in North Carolina. So when someone would come, the examiner's office would call the headquarters, and we would check because they would be bringing in a license, and we're verifying to make sure it's a true license. So we may call that their country's embassy. We may call to see what their guidelines are, but it was only a few countries that we had allowed to do that. California was allowing everybody to do that. That's why as soon as they would go to California, they get that commercial
Right.
license. And because it's a federal license, they would go to Florida, go to New York, come to North Carolina. And what would happen is, because it's a federal license, all the examiner would do is transfer it over to the North Carolina. They didn't have to take any tests or anything because it's a federal license. So I think that's the thing now that is being enforced, you know, but you don't have to have a social
Right.
security number to get a CDL. You just have to have an ITIN and a authorization for work. And the problem that I think is the
Okay.
authorization for work, like in North Carolina, your CDL license will expire when your authorization for work expires. But then people had sued for that. So they say, okay, if this person pays for 8 years, we'll get them 8 years. But if their work authorization, we'll put in the notes that their work authorization expires 2 years prior to their CDL expiring. The problem was nobody was enforcing it. So you have people that their work authorization had expired, but they still had CDLs that were issued for 8
Mhm.
years. And I think that was it
Okay.
was just all the lawsuits. But I just think like, for me, the fix, not to fix all, but to at least try to like make things happy, make people happy on both sides, is if they have a record, like you pull up in Social
Okay.
Security and you actually see their Social Security, their earnings
Mhm.
statement, what they paid, to me, and if they clear with no violent
Right.
crimes, okay, we can kind of like negotiate that that's not somebody that raped a 10-year-old girl or stabbed a young lady in the neck on the bus. We're talking
Mhm.
about let's try to find some type of
Okay.
a medium where we can meet to where the ones that aren't violent, the ones that are doing what they're supposed to be doing, okay, we can, do some background just to make sure you're not a agent of Russia or China. But I just think there has to be, it can't just be
Right.
so, is this way or no way, or this way or no way. Do you agree with that, or?
I'm a little skeptical on that, and just because I was prior law enforcement, because when
Mhm.
you start bending rules for some, then everybody's going to expect some type of preferential treatment. And so I think if you came across the border illegally, in my opinion, you got to go back and you have to come and you have to do it the right way.
Okay. And I definitely agree with that. A lot of our neighborhood is pretty diverse. We have people from India, Africa,
Mhm.
Belgium. That's why I love our neighborhood. And you could tell like
Mhm.
everybody as soon as they get here can't speak a lick of English. And now we fast forward 5, 7 years down, and they're speaking like we are. They I remember one of our neighbors when his wife got her citizenship, the first 4th of July that happened, it was, it was like they had fireworks, just happy to be an American citizen. And I just wish we would kind of like get that, you know, we would kind of like get back to that, where people
Yeah.
appreciate what's being done and what citizenship means, because I know some people that have become
Right. Right.
naturalized, they now think that if they just hand it to anybody, everything that they did to get it
Mhm.
is belittled.
Right.
One of the last questions I wanted to ask you is looking at the laws that were, I guess, they overrode. Um, do you know any? I know the two people. I believe one of them was in a district that was a part of Charlotte. Um, she had, when it was time to vote, she had just left
Mhm.
out. So they would have the right numbers because she was present. She just didn't. She left out, so she wouldn't be considered present. So as long as there's a certain number of people there,
Mhm.
then that percentage goes based
Right.
off the number of people that are in the room. So she and another gentleman, they
Right.
chose to just walk out because they were primaried.
Yeah.
Are you aware of any of that situation?
Right. Yes. Carla Cunningham, and I think his
Mhm.
name is pronounced my Steve Muhammad. Right. And they did. They walked out so that they would not have to vote, which gave the Republicans the majority, so they could override Governor Stein's veto.
Okay. Me personally, those four that were vetoed, um, do you agree with,
Mhm.
this would be a yes or no. Do you agree with law enforcement um cooperating with ICE for the violent offenders that they catch or that's in jailhouses?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. The other bill, as far as the DEI in K through 12, that was overridden. Do you agree or disagree with that one?
I also agree with that one.
Okay. What is one reason why you would say you agree with K through 12?
So, a part of that bill was that instead of having all of these, what I call social awareness trainings, and
Mhm.
trainings that most educators said, did not sway them one way or the other. They felt like that it was a total waste of time and it was a waste of resources. So, we can circle back and put that money back into programs that are going to help children who are academically struggling.
Mm.
So that's one reason why I definitely agree that all that diversity training, and it also, from what I've talked to a lot of people, it kind of, you're sitting or you're pulling the Black students and saying, hey, look, these kids are different. We have to teach them different. They act different.
Mhm.
We just have to come up with something real magical in order to educate children. And children are not, they're not dumb. They're not naive to what's being said about them. And I think what that also does is it creates stereotypes. It
Mhm.
creates that we have to implement special processes for these special students. So when you're talking about equality, you're basically saying that we have to lower standards and we have to lower test grades and we have to, basically come up with something totally different specifically for Black people, for Black students. So
Mm.
I definitely agree that instead of, teaching people about Black people and how they think and how they behave and how they act and what your response should be to Black people, that we need to fund take that money and those resources and get them back into the school, and how are they going to academically help children.
Okay. Now, let me ask you this question. If I had like one thing that I could change, when it comes to when
Mhm.
I hear people talking about DEI, um, in
Mhm.
higher education, I don't feel your race
Mhm.
should even be on your college application. I don't think your race, like there was something that used to be on job applications. Have you ever been convicted of a felony or something? But then they had to revise
Mhm.
it,
Mhm.
um, to where it wasn't as. And I think it should be the same thing when
Mhm.
it comes to like admissions to schools or employment. I think all job interviews should
Mhm.
be behind the screen. You can't see the person. You can't. You don't know their race. Where you literally you're looking at their merit. You're looking at their training. You're looking at their education. You're looking at a balance of those things. Um, I just think that out of all the places I've been in the country, I mean in the world, we're the only country that divides our skin color, like African American, Asian American, Indian, Samoan American. Like when you go to Greece, no matter what your skin color is, you're born there, you're Greek, you're Italian, you're Jamaican. Like there's Chinese people, they look
Okay.
Asian, but they go based off of nationality. Their nationality, they don't really press, the division of your ethnic. Well, I don't want to say ethnic, but your root background. How do you feel about
Mhm.
removing
Okay.
race from applications and school applications?
You know what? I've never thought of that, but I do think that that is a good idea, especially when you first start interviewing an applicant, and
Mhm.
maybe have an application that doesn't have race on there. Age discrimination is another thing, so maybe don't have your age on there and just the information where they can see if you are or are not qualified for that particular position. And then once you're interviewed, and if they decide to move you forward, then you can gather all that information. And to me, I mean, that is actually an excellent idea that evens the playing field. So that is actually an excellent idea that I've never even thought of. To me, the most qualified person should absolutely get the job. The person who aligns with what the company needs should absolutely get the job. I don't believe that you should say, okay, we need one Asian, we need one Chinese, we need one Italian. I don't think that those are good hiring practices. And even with today, with the announcement that, that I have been appointed chair of Mothers for Liberty, I was looking at the comments, and because I'm Black, some people were saying, oh, she's a DEI, she's DEI, she's DEI. I have a master's degree in organizational management and leadership development. So I am qualified. And I doubt that that interview committee chose me because of my race. I think it was my credentials that got me that position. But because I am a Black person, it is so easy for others to just, stereotype you. Oh, you're DEI, you're DEI. You got it because you're Black, or you're a woman, or this or that. So I think that is actually an amazing idea, that within that first window of we're just going to choose people to interview, none of that information should be on the application.
Okay. I appreciate that. Makes me feel good for you to offer that type of input on it. But what I want to do is ask you, I know we had started with schools, and then we went a little bit to the General Assembly. I think that could be another couple of hours talking about bills and laws. So I wanted to kind of like go back to Black students, and this would be the last question I ask you. Can North Carolina eliminate race-based preferences and ideological pressure while still directly addressing the documented education and economic barriers of Black students?
I think so. One of the things that I look at is the poverty level. And I don't know if a lot of people are aware that as far as a race, Black people have hit the lowest poverty level ever. And we are at 17%. So that means that out of the 13%, according to the standards for poverty level, 17% of Black people are living in poverty. So that's huge, especially I think in the 70s, it was like 37%. So, we made huge strides. I think that as a race of people, I think that we have to consider all the factors. And not just say, okay, we're just going to look this way or we're going to look that way. We have to look at every single factor. And I don't think that poverty is the biggest factor anymore. And I think if we could look at those numbers and we look at the buying power, and that's huge, the buying power of the Black dollar, we are spending massive amount of money, but what we're not doing is circulating those monies and funds back into our own communities. So I think that we are at a good point where we could absolutely have those conversations.
Well, I think let me see. I definitely want to encourage the viewers to hit the thumbs up, definitely subscribe and share. I think there's some information that could definitely help. But I wanted to address one of the viewers. He wrote, I think that would be a good, because it's now a level field, Julian. And then he also wrote, now whoever is best qualified should get the job. Those were things when me personally, when I hear people talk about Black excellence, you know, to me, Black excellence is, okay, you've done everything that people are supposed to do. Like you got accepted to this college, but you got accepted even though you didn't have to submit a SAT, or GRE, you didn't have to do certain things. You just, sometimes there's an issue where when you receive something just because of the color of your skin, sometimes that could diminish.
Right.
It could just, in the outside world, it could just diminish those things. But I definitely think that, there's ways of addressing it. It's just something that the Black community has to be able to accept because, it's almost like when it
Right.
comes to kids, once you give kids a taste of something, it's hard to take it back. It's hard without getting kickback. They'll get over it. But I just think it's something that I think the Black community is so much bigger than the agenda of DEI. I just think we have more
Right.
excellence than being strict and limiting and wanting that to be the label of why we're successful. That's something
Right.
that I really don't like.
And you're absolutely right. And another thing that I had to point out to my son just this week, when you look at the job market, and at one point when I first went into the correctional system, I was working in HR. So I actually received the applications. I actually went through them to decide, who was going to go to the next round. And for one correctional officer position, we might have gotten 300 applications. So when you're looking at 300 applications for one job, and your only criteria is that, well, they have to be Black or they have to be Asian or it has to be a female. Is that fair to the other 299 applicants who actually prepared by taking advantage of opportunities and made themselves, ready for an opportunity? And even myself, I have a master's degree. I have years of experience in education. I have an associate degree, a bachelor's degree. I got laid off from my job. And the HR director, she told me, she said, Annette, you are going to get another job. You are prepared, but it's going to take time. I had 3 interviews in 1 year. And I never thought to myself that, oh, I'm not getting interviews because I'm Black. I don't know, how many people were Black, but people would not believe the number of people that apply for one job position.
Yeah.
It is highly competitive.
Oh yeah, I definitely understand that. Again, I just want to definitely thank you again for sharing your time. We did go over a little bit, but I apologize for that.
That's okay.
But I just want to
That's
make
fine.
sure that people get really good information. I appreciate you being as thorough as you were. And I just want to ask that people continue to just follow you on your path on what God's taking you. And
Thank you.
I look forward to seeing all the great things with Moms of Liberty that you're gonna chair and do well.
Thank
All right.
you. Thank you so much. And I would just ask for any listeners out there, I'm going to be holding public meetings and meet and greets and town halls. And if you want to know what Mothers for Liberty is really about and what our organization is trying to do, please come out and just listen to us, bring your questions. I think everybody knows that I'm straight, no chaser. And, I'm not an emotional person. I go on facts.
Okay. I appreciate that. And I'll see everyone next week. And y'all be safe this weekend.
Okay, thank you.
All right now.